It was just after 3 a.m. when a violent crash tore through the stillness of a rain-soaked street on the east side of the city. In one swift blow, the front door of a modest brick townhouse splintered open, scattering pieces of wood across the hallway. A heavily armed SWAT team stormed inside, shouting commands over the echo of boots pounding on the hardwood floor. In the dim light of a bedside lamp, a woman in her early 40s stumbled into the living room, heart racing, her robe slipping from her shoulders. For a moment, she froze. The bright glare of flashlights blinding her, the laser dots dancing across her walls. Her hands shot up instinctively. On the dining table behind her, a stack of law books and neatly arranged case files stood as silent witnesses. As the officers fanned out through her home, the woman slowly reached toward a leather case on the table and held it up to the nearest flashlight. The badge inside caught the beam, glinting with authority. In an instant, the mood in the room shifted. The intruders realized that the person they had just raided wasn't a criminal at all. She was a federal prosecutor. Her name was Alicia Carter, a respected federal prosecutor who had built her career on tackling corruption and white-collar crime. In the courthouse, she was known for her sharp intellect and unwavering sense of fairness. Outside of work, she was a private, thoughtful woman who preferred evenings spent at home. Surrounded by her books and case notes, Alicia lived alone in a narrow two-story townhouse in a historically black neighborhood that had seen both hardship and renewal over the decades. The house itself was modest but warm. Framed photographs of family lined the hallway. A shelf of legal texts occupied one corner of the living room, and her desk, often cluttered with manila folders, sat beneath a window overlooking the street. That night had been like so many others. Alicia had worked late preparing arguments for an upcoming trial against a prominent businessman accused of embezzlement. She had pored over documents until well past midnight, finally closing her laptop just after 1 a.m. and leaving the files stacked neatly on the table. Outside, the city had quieted. The only sounds were the occasional rumble of a distant train and the soft patter of rain against the windows. While Alicia drifted off to sleep, a very different scene unfolded elsewhere in the city. A tactical unit assembled in a police precinct's briefing room, poring over a warrant that listed an address in Alicia's neighborhood. An informant had claimed that a dangerous fugitive, wanted in connection with violent robberies, was hiding at a particular house on that street. Pressed for time, the unit rushed to mobilize. No one on the team noticed a small but crucial error. The address on the warrant had a single digit wrong. That mistake placed their target not at a suspected hideout, but at Alicia Carter's quiet townhouse. At 2:58 a.m., a convoy of armored vehicles rolled silently through the rain-slicked streets and came to a stop at her doorstep. Neighbors peeking from behind curtains saw the flashing red and blue lights reflected in puddles. Still, they were too startled to react before the raid began. For Alicia, the night that had started as just another late work session was about to become a turning point, not just in her life, but in a national conversation about race, policing, and the fragile trust between citizens and the institutions meant to protect them. The raid unfolded with military precision and terrifying speed. A battering ram struck the front door with a deafening crack. The wood splintered, and the door gave way under the force. Officers in tactical gear flooded into the hallway, rifles raised, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The commotion jolted Alicia awake. For a few disoriented seconds, she thought she was dreaming. The shouts, the heavy footsteps, the harsh light sweeping across the walls. She pulled on her robe and hurried toward the living room, only to freeze as she saw armed strangers in her home. "Hands up!" one of them barked. The tone, the posture of the rifles, the urgent movements, all of it made her heart hammer in her chest. Her mind raced through her options. Any sudden movement could be misread. Even reaching for her phone on the nightstand felt dangerous. She slowly raised her hands higher, palms open. "I live here," she said in a steady but trembling voice. The chaos of the raid almost drowned out her words. The officers fanned out, shouting to each other as they searched room by room. Closets were yanked open. Doors slammed against walls. Drawers were pulled out and dumped. As they swept past her dining table, one officer's flashlight caught the edge of a worn leather case lying beside the stack of legal files. He picked it up, flipped it open, and saw the badge, the unmistakable insignia of a federal prosecutor. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Confusion rippled through the team. The commanding officer, realizing something was wrong, barked an order to hold the search. Within minutes, calls were being made to supervisors, and the truth began to emerge. Alicia stood by the table, trying to keep her breathing steady as the adrenaline surged through her body. Her home had been turned upside down in a matter of minutes. Her sense of security had been shattered. By dawn, news crews had gathered on the street, alerted by neighbors who the commotion had awakened. Camera flashes lit up the scene as Alicia, still wrapped in her robe, stood by the splintered doorway, answering questions from supervisors and trying to process what had just happened. For many who saw the story unfold on morning news broadcasts, one question lingered. Would the raid have been carried out with the same haste, with the same lack of verification, had the homeowner not been a black woman living in that particular neighborhood? In the days that followed, Alicia's story spread rapidly. The image of a federal prosecutor standing in her own home, hands raised before an armed SWAT team, became a powerful symbol of something deeper than one mistaken address. City officials scrambled to explain. They pointed to procedural errors: the foul tip, the misread address, the breakdown in communication between departments. However, the explanations were often deemed inadequate by many. The incident laid bare a troubling pattern. Aggressive tactics often fell most heavily on communities of color, sometimes with tragic results. Alicia, though still shaken, realized she could not stay silent. At first, she provided brief, careful statements to reporters, emphasizing the need for improved training and accountability. But as she heard from others, neighbors, former clients, even fellow attorneys, who shared their own stories of unjust treatment, she felt compelled to speak more openly about it. When she testified before a legislative committee on law enforcement reform, her words carried the weight of both professional insight and personal experience. She recounted the fear she had felt as armed officers poured into her home and the deeper pain of realizing that her badge had not protected her from being presumed guilty. "I have spent my career believing in the promise of equal protection under the law," she told the committee. "That night I saw how fragile that promise can be for those who look like me." The hearing room fell silent as she finished her testimony. Clips of her remarks went viral, igniting public debate. Advocates for reform hailed her courage. Police unions pushed back, insisting the raid was a tragic but honest mistake. Yet the tide of opinion was shifting. Alicia's story humanized what had often been treated as abstract statistics. It showed that systemic problems could permeate the lives of even those who worked within the system itself. Months passed. The broken door was replaced, the walls repainted, and the street outside returned to its quiet routine. But for Alicia, the sense of intrusion lingered. She often caught herself glancing at the doorway when she heard unexpected noises at night. Still, she refused to let the experience define her as a victim. Instead, she used it to fuel her advocacy for change. She joined coalitions calling for limits on no-knock warrants and advocated for mandatory cross-checks of addresses before conducting any high-risk raids. She worked closely with local civil rights groups to draft proposals for transparency in police operations. Gradually, reforms began to take shape. The city implemented a policy requiring independent confirmation of addresses by at least 2 separate officers. The state legislature debated and later passed a bill restricting the use of no-knock raids, except in situations that pose a genuine threat to life or property. Police academies added Alicia's story to their training modules as a cautionary example of what happens when haste overrides diligence. Through it all, Alicia continued her work as a prosecutor, but colleagues noticed a shift in her approach. She was still firm, but became more attuned to the human side of the cases before her. When she questioned officers on the witness stand, her inquiries about procedure carried a new, sharper edge, not from hostility, but from lived understanding of what could happen when protocols were ignored. One autumn evening, as twilight settled over the city, Alicia stood at her rebuilt doorway watching the street. Children played in the fading light. Neighbors greeted each other across fences. She reflected on how a single night's mistake had rippled outward, sparking anger, prompting reforms, and reshaping her own mission as a servant of justice. In a talk to a group of young law students, she shared what had become her guiding lesson. Justice isn't only about punishing the guilty, she said. It's about protecting the innocent, especially from the misuse of power. If we allow fear or bias to dictate how we enforce the law, then we fail the very people the law is meant to serve. Her words drew a quiet, thoughtful applause. For many in the room, it was the first time they had considered how fragile trust in the system could be, and how essential it was to rebuild it. As Alicia locked her door that night, she knew the incident would never entirely leave her. But it had transformed her from a diligent prosecutor into a voice for deeper accountability. Her experience reminded the public that justice is not just the outcome of trials, but also the manner in which those in authority treat every citizen. For anyone hearing her story, the question lingered long after the video ended. If even a federal prosecutor could have her door kicked in on a false tip, what does that mean for the countless others who lack a badge, a platform, or a voice?